Theon. There was no safe anchorage at Pike, but Theon Greyjoy wished to look on his father's castle from the sea, to see it as he'd seen it last, 10 years before, when Robert Baratheon's war galley had borne him away to be a ward of Eddard Stark. On that day he stood beside the rail, listening to the stroke of the oars and the pounding of the master's drum while he watched Pike dwindle in the distance. Now he wanted to see it grow larger, to rise from the sea before him. Obedient to his wishes, the Miraham beat her way past the point with her sails snapping and her captain cursing the wind and his crew and the follies of high-born lordlings. Theon drew the hood of his cloak up against the spray and looked for home. The shore was all sharp rocks and glowering cliffs, and the castle seemed one with the rest, its towers and walls and bridges quarried from the same grey-black stone, wet by the same salt waves, festooned with the same spreading patches of dark green lichen, speckled by the droppings of the same sea-birds. The point of land on which the Greyjoys had raised their fortress had once thrust like a sword into the bowels of the ocean, but the waves had hammered at it day and night until the land broke and shattered, thousands of years past. All that remained were 3 bare and barren islands and a dozen towering stacks of rock that rose from the water like the pillars of some sea god's temple, while the angry waves foamed and crashed among them. Drear, dark, foreboding, Pike stood atop these islands and pillars, almost a part of them, its curtain wall closing off the headland round the foot of the great stone bridge that leapt from the cliff-top to the largest islet, dominated by the massive bulk of the great keep. Farther out were the Kitchen Keep and the Bloody Keep, each on its own island. Towers and outbuildings clung to the stacks beyond, linked to each other by covered archways when the pillars stood close, by long swaying walks of wood and rope when they did not. The sea tower rose from the outmost island at the point of the broken sword, the oldest part of the castle, round and tall, the sheer-sided pillar on which it stood half eaten by the endless battering of the waves. The base of the tower was white from centuries of salt spray, the upper stories green from the lichen that crawled over it like a thick blanket, the jagged crown black with soot from its nightly watchfire. Above the sea tower snapped his father's banner. The Miraham was too far off for Theon to see more than the cloth itself, but he knew the device it bore. The golden kraken of House Greyjoy, arms writhing and reaching against a black field. The banner streamed from an iron mast, shivering and twisting as the wind gusted, like a bird struggling to take flight. And here at last the direwolf of Stark did not fly above, casting its shadow down upon the Greyjoy kraken. Theon had never seen a more stirring sight. In the sky behind the castle the fine red tail of the comet was visible through thin, scuttling clouds. All the way from Riverrun to Seaguard the Malisers had argued about its meaning. "It is my comet," Theon told himself, sliding a hand into his fur-lined cloak to touch the oilskin pouch snug in its pocket. Inside was the letter Robb Stark had given him, paper as good as a crown. "Does the castle look as you remember it, my lord?" the captain's daughter asked as she pressed herself against his arm. "It looks smaller," Theon confessed, "though perhaps that is only the distance." The Miraham was a fat-bellied southern merchanter up from Old Town, carrying wine and cloth and seed to trade for iron ore. Her captain was a fat-bellied southern merchanter as well, and the stony sea that foamed up at the feet of the castle made his plump lips quiver, so he stayed well out, further than Theon would have liked. An iron-born captain in a longship would have taken them along the cliffs and under the high bridge that spanned the gap between the gatehouse and the great keep, but this plump old-towner had neither the craft, the crew, nor the courage to attempt such a thing. So they sailed past at a safe distance, and Theon must content himself with seeing Pike from afar. Even so, the Miraham had to struggle mightily to keep itself off those rocks. "It must be windy there," the captain's daughter observed. He laughed. "Windy and cold and damp. A miserable hard place, in truth. But my Lord Father once told me that hard places breed hard men, and hard men rule the world." The captain's face was as green as the sea when he came bowing up to Theon and asked, "May we make for port now, my lord?" "You may," Theon said, a faint smile playing about his lips. The promise of gold had turned the old towner into a shameless lickspittle. It would have been a much different voyage if a longship from the islands had been waiting at Seaguard as he'd hoped. Iron-born captains were proud and wilful, and would not go in awe of a man's blood. The islands were too small for awe, and a longship smaller still. If every captain was a king aboard his own ship, as was often said, it was small wonder they named the islands the land of 10,000 kings. And when you've seen your king shit over the rail and turn green in a storm, it was hard to bend the knee and pretend they were gods. "The drowned god makes men," old King Euron Redhand had once said thousands of years ago, "but it's men who make crowns." A longship would have made the crossing in half the time as well. The Miraham was a wallowing tub, if truth be told, and he would not care to be aboard her in a storm. Still, Theon could not be too unhappy. He was here, undrowned, and the voyage had offered certain other amusements. He put an arm around the captain's daughter. "Summon me when we make Lordsport," he told her father. "We'll be below, in my cabin." He led the girl away aft while her father watched them go in sullen silence. The cabin was the captain's in truth, but it had been turned over to Theon's use when they sailed from Seaguard. The captain's daughter had not been turned over to his use, but she'd come to his bed willingly enough all the same. A cup of wine, a few whispers, and there she was. The girl was a shade plump for his taste, with skin as splotchy as oatmeal, but her breasts filled his hands nicely, and she had been a maiden the first time he took her. That was surprising at her age, but Theon found it diverting. He did not think the captain approved, and that was amusing as well, watching the man struggle to swallow his outrage while performing his courtesies to the High Lord, the rich purse of gold he'd been promised never far from his thoughts. As Theon shrugged out of his wet cloak, the girl said, "You must be so happy to see her home again, my lord. How many years have you been away?" 10 or close makes no matter," he told her. "I was a boy of 10 when I was taken to Winterfell as a ward of Eddard Stark." A ward in name, a hostage in truth. Half his days a hostage, but no longer. His life was his own again, and nowhere a Stark to be seen. He drew the captain's daughter close and kissed her on her ear. "Take off your cloak." She dropped her eyes, suddenly shy, but did as he bid her. When the heavy garment, sodden with spray, fell from her shoulders to the deck, she gave him a little bow and smiled anxiously. She looked rather stupid when she smiled, but he'd never required a woman to be clever. "Come here," he told her. She did. "I've never seen the Iron Islands." "Count yourself fortunate." Theon stroked her hair. It was fine and dark, though the wind had made a tangle of it. "The islands are stern and stony places, scant of comfort and bleak of prospect. Death is never far here, and life is mean and meagre. Men spend their nights drinking ale and arguing over whose lot is worse, the fisher-folk who fight the sea, or the farmers who try to scratch a crop from the poor thin soil. If truth be told, the miners have it worse than either, breaking their backs down in the dark, and for what? Iron, lead, tin, those are our treasures. Small wonder the Iron Men of old took to raiding." The stupid girl did not seem to be listening. "I could go ashore with you," she said. "I would, if it please you." "You could go ashore," Theon agreed, squeezing her breast, "but not with me, I fear." "I'd work in your castle, my lord. I can clean fish and bake bread and churn butter. Father says my pepper crab stew's the best he's ever tasted. You could find me a place in your kitchens, and I could make your pepper crab stew." "And warm my bed by night?" He reached for the laces of her bodice and began to undo them, fingers deft and practised. "Once I might have carried you home as a prize and kept you to wife whether you willed it or no. The Iron Men of old did such things. A man had his rock wife, his true bride, iron-born like himself, but then he had his salt wives too, women captured on raids." The girl's eyes grew wide, and not because he bared her breasts. "I would be your salt wife, my lord." "I fear those days are gone." Theon's fingers circled one heavy teat, spiraled in toward the fat brown nipple. "No longer may we ride the wind with fire and sword, taking what we want. Now we scratch in the ground and toss lines in the sea like other men, and count ourselves lucky if we have salt cod and porridge enough to get us through the winter." He took her nipple in his mouth and bit it until she gasped. "You can put it in me again, if it please you," she whispered in his ear as he sucked. When he raised his head from her breast, the skin was dark red where his mouth had marked her. "It would please me to teach you something new. Unlace me and pleasure me with your mouth." "With my mouth?" His thumb brushed lightly over her full lips. "It's what those lips were made for, sweetling. If you were my salt wife, you'd do as I command." She was timid at first, but learned quickly for such a stupid girl, which pleased him. Her mouth was as wet and sweet as her cunt, and this way he did not have to listen to her mindless prattle. Once I would have kept her as a salt wife, in truth, he thought to himself as he slid his fingers through her tangled hair. Once, when we kept the old way, lived by the axe instead of the pick, taking what we would, be it wealth, women, or glory. In those days the iron board didn't work mines. That was labour for the captives brought back from hostings, and so too the sorry business of farming and tending goats and sheep. War was an iron man's proper trade. The drowned god made them to reave and rape, to carve out kingdoms and write their names in fire and blood and song. Aegon the dragon had destroyed the old way when he burned Black Harren, gave Harren's kingdom back to the weakling rivermen, and reduced the Iron Islands to an insignificant backwater of a much greater realm. Yet the old red tales were still told around driftwood fires and smoky hearths all across the islands, even behind the high stone halls of Pike. Theon's father numbered among his titles the style of Lord Reaper, and the Greyjoy words boasted that, "We do not so." It had been to bring back the old ways more than for the empty vanity of a crown that Lord Balon had staged his great rebellion. Robert Baratheon had written a bloody end to that hope with the help of his friend Eddard Stark. But both men were dead now. Mere boys ruled in their stead, and the realm that Aegon the Conqueror had forged was smashed and sundered. "This is the season," Theon thought as the captain's daughter slid her lips up and down the length of him. "The season, the year, the day, and I am the man." He smiled crookedly, wondering what his father would say when Theon told him that he, the last-born, babe and hostage, he had succeeded where Lord Balon himself had failed. His climax came on him sudden as a storm, and he filled the girl's mouth with his seed. Startled, she tried to pull away, but Theon held her tight by the hair. Afterward she crawled up beside him. "Did it please my lord?" "Well enough," he told her. "It tasted salty," she murmured. "Like the sea?" She nodded. "I've always loved the sea, my lord." "As I have," he said, rolling her nipple idly between his fingers. It was true. The sea meant freedom to the men of the Iron Islands. He'd forgotten that until the Miraham had raised sail at Seaguard. The sounds brought old feelings back. The creak of wood and rope, the captain's shouted commands, the snap of the sails as the wind filled them, each as familiar as the beating of his own heart, and as comforting. "I must remember this," Theon vowed to himself. "I must never go far from the sea again." "Take me with you, my lord," the captain's daughter begged. "I don't need to go to your castle. I can stay in some town and be your salt wife." She reached out to stroke his cheek. Theon Greyjoy pushed her hand aside and climbed off his bunk. "My place is Pike, and yours is on this ship." "I can't stay here now." He laced up his breeches. "Why not?" "My father," she told him. "Once you're gone, he'll punish me, my lord. He'll call me names and hit me." Theon swept his cloak off its peg and over his shoulders. "Fathers are like that," he admitted as he pinned the folds with a silver clasp. "Tell him he should be pleased. As many times as I've fucked you, you'll likely be with child. It's not every man who has the honour of raising a king's bastard." She looked at him stupidly, so he left her there. The Miraham was rounding a wooded point. Below the pine-clad bluffs, a dozen fishing boats were pulling in their nets. The big cog stayed well out from them, tacking. Theon moved to the bow for a better view. He saw the castle first, the stronghold of the Botleys. When he was a boy it had been timber and wattle, but Robert Baratheon had razed that structure to the ground. Lord Swain had rebuilt it in stone, for now a small square keep crowned the hill. Pale green flags drooped from the squat corner towers, each emblazoned with a shoal of silvery fish. Beneath the dubious protection of the fish-ridden little castle lay the village of Lordsport, its harbour aswarm with ships. When he'd last seen Lordsport, it had been a smoking wasteland, the skeletons of burnt longships and smashed galleys littering the stony shore like the bones of dead leviathans, the houses no more than broken walls and cold ashes. After 10 years, few traces of the war remained. The small folk had built new hovels with the stones of the old, and cut fresh sod for their roofs. A new inn had risen beside the landing, twice the size of the old one, with a lower story of cut stone and 2 upper stories of timber. The sept beyond had never been rebuilt, though. Only a 7-sided foundation remained where it had stood. Robert Baratheon's fury had soured the Iron Men's taste for the new gods, it would seem. Theon was more interested in ships than gods. Among the masts of countless fishing boats he spied a Tyroshi trading galley offloading beside a lumbering Ibbenese cog with her black-tarred hull. A great number of longships, 50 or 60 at the least, stood out to sea or lay beached on the pebbled shore to the north. Some of the sails bore devices from the other islands, the Blood Moon of Winch, Lord Goodbrother's banded black war-horn, Harlar's silver scythe. Theon searched for his uncle Euron's silence. Of that lean and terrible red ship he saw none, but his father's great kraken was there, her bow ornamented with a grey iron ram in the shape of its namesake. Had Lord Balon anticipated him and called the Greyjoy banners? His hand went inside his cloak again to the oilskin pouch. No one knew of his letter but Robb Stark. They were no fools to entrust their secrets to a bird. Still, Lord Balon was no fool either. He might well have guessed why his son was coming home at long last, and acted accordingly. The thought did not please him. His father's war was long done and lost. This was Theon's hour, his plan, his glory, and in time his crown. Yet if the longships are hosting... It might have only been a caution, now that he thought on it, a defensive move, lest the war spill out across the sea. Old men were cautious by nature. His father was old now, and so too his uncle Victarion, who commanded the Iron Fleet. His uncle Euron was a different song, to be sure, but the silence did not seem to be in port. It's all for the good, Theon told himself. This way I shall be able to strike all the more quickly. As the Miraham made her way landward, Theon paced the deck restlessly, scanning the shore. He'd not thought to find Lord Balon himself at the quayside, but surely his father would have sent someone to meet him. Silas Sourmouth the steward, Lord Botley perhaps, or even Dagmar Cleftjaw. It would be good to look on Dagmar's hideous old face again. It was not as though they'd had no word of his arrival. Robb had sent ravens from Riverrun, and when they'd found no longship at Seaguard, Jason Mallister had sent his own birds to Pike, supposing that Robb's were lost. Yet he saw no familiar faces, no honour guard waiting to escort him from Lordsport to Pike, only small folk going about their small business. Shore hands rolled casks of wine off the Tyroshi trader. Fisherfolk cried the day's catch. Children ran and played. A priest in the sea-water robes of the drowned god was leading a pair of horses along the pebbled shore, while above him a slattern leaned out a window in the inn, calling out to some passing Ibbenese sailors. A handful of Lordsport merchants had gathered to meet the ship. They shouted questions as the Miraham was tying up. "We're out of Old Town," the captain called down. "Bearing apples and oranges, wine from the arbour, feathers from the summer isles. I've pepper, woven leathers, a bolt of Moorish lace, mirrors for my lady, a pair of Old Town wood harps sweet as any of you ever heard." The gangplank descended with a creak and a thud. "And I've brought your heir back to you." The Lordsport men gazed on Theon with blank bovine eyes, and he realized they did not know who he was. It made him angry. He pressed a golden dragon into the captain's palm. "Have your men bring my things." Without waiting for a reply, he strode down the gangplank. "Innkeeper," he barked, "I require a horse." "As you say, my lord," the man responded, without so much as a bow. He'd forgotten how bold the Ironborn could be. "Happens as I have one might do. Where would you like to be riding, my lord?" "Pike." The fool still did not know him. He should have worn his good doublet with the kraken embroidered on the breast. "You want to be off soon to reach Pike before dark," the innkeeper said. "My boy will go with you and show you the way." "Your boy will not be needed," a deep voice called. "Nor your house. I shall see my nephew back to his father's house." The speaker was the priest who'd been leading the horses along the shoreline. As the man approached, the small folk bent the knee, and Theon heard the innkeeper murmur, "Damp hair." Tall and thin, with fierce black eyes and a beak of a nose, the priest was garbed in mottled robes of green and grey and blue, the swirling colours of the drowned god. A water-skin hung under his arm on a leather strap, and ropes of dried seaweed were braided through his waist-long black hair and untrimmed beard. A memory prodded at Theon. In one of his rare curt letters, Lord Balon had written of his youngest brother going down in a storm and returning wholly when he washed up safe on shore. "Uncle Aaron?" he said doubtfully. "Nephew Theon," the priest replied. "Your lord father bid me fetch you. Come." "In a moment, uncle." He turned back to the Miraham. "My things," he commanded the captain. A sailor fetched him down his tall yew bow and quiver of arrows, but it was the captain's daughter who brought the pack with his good clothing. "My lord." Her eyes were red. When he took the pack, she made as if to embrace him, there in front of her own father and his priestly uncle and half the island. Theon turned deftly aside. "You have my thanks." "Please," she said. "I do love you well, my lord." "I must go." He hurried after his uncle, who was already well down the pier. Theon caught him with a dozen long strides. "I had not looked for you, uncle. After 10 years I thought perhaps my lord father and lady mother might come themselves, or send Dagmar with an honour guard." "It is not for you to question the commands of the Lord Reaper of Pike." The priest's manner was chilly, most unlike the man Theon remembered. Aeron Greyjoy had been the most amiable of his uncles, feckless and quick to laugh, fond of songs, ale, and women. "As to Dagmar, the Cleftjaw is gone to Old Wick as your father's behest to rouse the Stonehouses and drums." "To what purpose? Why are the longships hosting?" "Why have the longships ever hosted?" His uncle left the horses tied up in front of the waterside inn. When they reached them, he turned to Theon. "Tell me true." "Tell me true, nephew. Do you pray to the wolf gods now?" Theon seldom prayed at all, but that was not something you confessed to a priest, even your father's own brother. "Ned Stark prayed to a tree. No, I care nothing for Stark's gods." "Good. Kneel." The ground was all stones and mud. "Uncle, I—" "Kneel. Or are you too proud now, a lordling of the Greenlands come among us?" Theon knelt. He had a purpose here and might need Aeron's help to achieve it. A crown was worth a little mud and horse shit on his breeches, he supposed. "Bow your head." Lifting the skin, his uncle pulled the cork and directed a thin stream of sea-water down upon Theon's head. It drenched his hair and ran over his forehead into his eyes. Sheets washed down his cheeks, and a finger crept under his cloak and doublet and down his back, a cold rivulet along his spine. The salt made his eyes burn until it was all he could do not to cry out. He could taste the ocean on his lips. "Let Theon your servant be born again from the sea as you were," Aeron Greyjoy intoned. "Bless him with salt, bless him with stone, bless him with steel. Nephew, do you know your words?" "What is dead may never die," Theon said, remembering. "What is dead may never die," his uncle echoed, "but rises again, harder and stronger. Stand." Theon stood, blinking back tears from the salt in his eyes. Wordless, his uncle corked the waterskin, untied his horse and mounted. Theon did the same. They set off together, leaving the inn and the harbour behind them, up past the castle of Lord Botley into the stony hills. The priest ventured no further word. "I have been half my life away from home," Theon ventured at last. "Will I find the islands changed?" "Men fish the sea, dig in the earth, and die. Women birth children in blood and pain, and die. Night follows day. The winds and tides remain. The islands are as our God made them." "Gods, he's gone grim," Theon thought. "Will I find my sister and my lady mother at Pike?" "You will not. Your mother dwells on Harlar with her own sister. It is less raw there, and her cough troubles her. Your sister has taken Blackwind to Great Wick with messages from your lord father. She will return ere long, you may be sure." Theon did not need to be told that Black Wind was Usher's longship. He'd not seen his sister in 10 years, but that much he did know of her. Odd that she would call it that, when Robb Stark had a wolf named Grey Wind. "Stark is grey and Greyjoy's black," he murmured, smiling. "But it seems we're both windy." The priest had nothing to say to that. "And what of you, uncle?" Theon asked. "You were no priest when I was taken from Pike. I remember how you would sing the old reaving song, standing on the table with a horn of ale in hand." "Young I was, and vain," Aeron Greyjoy said. "But the sea washed my follies and my vanities away. That man drowned, nephew. His lungs filled with sea water, and the fish ate the scales off his eyes. When I rose again, I saw clearly." He's as mad as he is sour. Theon liked what he remembered of the old Aeron Greyjoy. "Uncle, why is my father called the Swords and Sails?" "Doubtless he will tell you at Pike." "I would know his plans now." "From me you shall not. We are commanded not to speak of this to any man." "Even to me?" Theon's anger flared. He'd led men in war, hunted with a king, won honour in tourney melees, ridden with Bryndin Blackfish and Great John Umber, fought in the Whispering Wood, bedded more girls than he could name, and yet his uncle was treating him as though he was still a child of 10. "If my father makes plans for war, I must know of them. I'm not any man. I am heir to Pike and the Iron Islands." "As to that," his uncle said, "we shall see." The words were a slap in the face. "We shall see? My brothers are both dead. I am your lord father's only living son." "Your sister lives." Asha? He thought, confounded. She was 3 years older than Theon, yet still. "A woman may inherit only if there is no male heir in the direct line," he insisted loudly. "I will not be cheated of my rights, I warn you." His uncle grunted. "You warn a servant of the drowned god boy? You have forgotten more than you know. And you are a great fool if you believe your lord father will ever hand these holy islands over to a Stark. Now be silent. The ride is long enough without your magpie chatterings." Theon held his tongue, though not without struggle. So that is the way of it, he thought, as if 10 years in Winterfell could make a Stark. Lord Eddard had raised him among his own children, but Theon had never been one of them. The whole castle, from Lady Stark to the lowliest kitchen scullion, knew he was hostage to his father's good behaviour, and treated him accordingly. Even the bastard Jon Snow had been accorded more honour than he had. Lord Eddard had tried to play the father from time to time, but to Theon he always remained the man who'd brought blood and fire to Pike and taken him from his home. As a boy he'd lived in fear of Stark's stern face and great dark sword. His wife was, if anything, even more distant and suspicious. As for their children, the younger ones had only been newling babes for most of his years at Winterfell. Only Robb and his base-born half-brother Jon Snow had been old enough to be worth his notice. The bastard was a sullen boy, quick to sense a slight, jealous of Theon's high births and Robb's regard for him. For Robb himself, Theon did have a certain affection, as for a younger brother, but it was best not to mention that. In Pike, it would seem, the old wars were still being fought. That ought not surprise him. The Iron Islands lived in the past. The present was too hard and bitter to be borne. Besides, his father and uncles were old, and the old lords were like that. They took their dusty feuds to the grave, forgetting nothing and forgiving less. It had been the same with the Mallisters, his companions on the ride from Riverrun to Seaguard. Patrick Mallister was not too ill a fellow. They shared a taste for wenches, wine, and hawking. But when old Lord Jason saw his heir growing overly fond of Theon's company, he'd taken Patrick aside to remind him that Seaguard had been built to defend the coast against the reavers from the Iron Islands, the Greyjoys of Pike chief among them. Their booming tower was named for its immense bronze bell, rung of old to call the townsfolk and farmhands into the castle when longships were sighted on the western horizon. "Never mind that the bell's been rung once in 300 years, Patrick told Theon the day after as he shared his father's cautions and a jug of green apple wine. "When my brother stormed Seaguard," Theon said, Lord Jason had slain Roderick Greyjoy under the walls of the castle and thrown the Ironman back into the bay. If your father supposes I bear him some enmity for that, it's only because he never knew Roderick. They had a laugh over that as they raced on ahead to an amorous young miller's wife that Patrick knew. Would that Patrick were with me now. Mallister or no, he was a more amiable riding companion than the sour old priest that his uncle Aaron had turned into. The path they rode wound up and up into bare stony hills. Soon they were out of sight of the sea, though the smell of salt still hung sharp in the damp air. They kept a steady plodding pace, past a shepherd's croft and the abandoned workings of a mine. This new holy Aaron Greyjoy was not much for talk. They rode in a gloom of silence. Finally, Theon could suffer it no longer. "Robb Stark is Lord of Winterfell now," he said. Aaron rode on. "One wolf is much like the other." "Robb has broken fealty with the Iron Throne and crowned himself king in the north. There's war." "The maester's ravens fly over salt as soon as rock. This news is old and cold." "It means a new day, uncle." "Every morning brings a new day, much like the old." "In Riverrun they would tell you different. They say the Red Comet is a herald of a new age, a messenger from the gods." "A sign it is," the priest agreed, "but from our God, not theirs. A burning brand it is, such as our people carried of old. It is the flame of the drowned god brought from the sea, and it proclaims a rising tide. It is time to hoist our sails and go forth into the world with fire and sword, as he did." Theon smiled. "I could not agree more." "A man agrees with God as a raindrop with the storm." "This raindrop will one day be a king, old man." Theon had suffered quite enough of his uncle's gloom. He put his spurs into his horse and trotted on ahead, smiling. It was nigh on sunset when they reached the walls of Pike, a crescent of dark stone that ran from cliff to cliff, with the gatehouse in the centre and 3 square towers to either side. Theon could still make out scars left by stones of Robert Baratheon's catapults. A new south tower had risen from the ruins of the old, its stone a paler shade of grey, and as yet unmarred by patches of lichen. That was where Robert had made his breach, storming in over the rubble and corpses with his war-hammer in hand, and Ned Stark at his side. Theon had watched from the safety of the sea tower, and sometimes he still saw the torches in his dreams, and heard the dull thunder of the collapse. The gates stood open to him, the rusted iron portcullis drawn up. The guards atop the battlements watched, with strangers' eyes, as Theon Greyjoy came home at last. Beyond the curtain wall were 100 acres of headland hard against the sky and sea. The stables were here, and the kennels, and a scatter of other outbuildings. Sheep and swine huddled in their pens while the castle dogs ran free. To the south were the cliffs and the wide stone bridge of the great keep. Theon could hear the crashing of waves as he swung down from his saddle. A stableman came to take his horse. A pair of gaunt children and some thralls stared at him with dull eyes, but there was no sign of his lord father, nor anyone else he recalled from boyhood. A bleak and bitter homecoming, he thought. The priest had not dismounted. "Will you not stay the night and share our meat and mead, uncle?" "Bring you, I was told. You are brought. Now I return to our god's business." Aaron Greyjoy turned his horse and rode slowly out beneath the muddy spikes of the portcullis. A bent-back old crone in a shapeless grey dress approached him warily. "My lord, I am sent to show you your chambers." "By whose bidding?" "Your lord father, my lord." Theon pulled off his gloves. "So do you know who I am? Why is my father not here to greet me?" "He awaits you in the sea tower, my lord, when you are rested from your trip." And I thought Ned Stark cold. "And who are you?" "Helya, who keeps this castle for your lord father." "Silas was steward here. They called him Sourmouth." Even now Theon could recall the whiny stench of the old man's breath. "Dead 5 years, my lord." "And what of Maester Cailan? Where is he?" "He sleeps in the sea. Wendmere keeps the ravens now." It is as if I were a stranger here, Theon thought. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has changed. "Show me to my chambers, woman," he commanded. Bowing stiffly, she led him across the headland to the bridge. That, at least, was as he remembered, the ancient stones slick with spray and spotted by lichen, the sea foaming under his feet like some great wild beast, the salt wind clutching at their clothes. Whenever he'd imagined his homecoming, he had always pictured himself returning to the snug bedchamber in the sea tower where he'd slept as a child. Instead, the old woman led him to the bloody keep. The halls were longer and better furnished, if no less cold nor damp. Theon was given a suite of chilly rooms with ceilings so high they were lost in gloom. He might have been more impressed if he had not known that these were the very chambers which had given the bloody keep its name. 1,000 years before, the sons of the River King had been slaughtered here, hacked to bits in their beds so that pieces of their bodies might be sent back to their father on the mainland. But Greyjoys were not murdered in Pike except once in a great while by their brothers, and his brothers were both dead. It was not fear of ghosts that made him glance about with dislike. The wall hangings were green with mildew, the mattress musty-smelling and sagging, the rushes old and brittle. Years had come and gone since these chambers had last been opened. The damp went bone-deep. "I'll have a basin of hot water and a fire in this hearth," he told the crone. "See that they light braziers in the other rooms to drive out some of the chill, and gods be good, get someone in here at once to change these rushes." "Yes, my lord, as you command." She fled. After some time they brought the hot water he'd asked for. It was only tepid and soon cold, and sea-water in the bargain, but it served to wash the dust of the long ride from his face and hair and hands. While 2 thralls lit his braziers, Theon stripped off his travel-stained clothing and dressed to meet his father. He chose boots of supple black leather, soft lamb's-wool breeches of silver grey, a black velvet doublet with the golden kraken of the Greyjoys embroidered on the breast. Around his throat he fastened a slender gold chain, around his waist a belt of bleached white leather. He hung a dirk at one hip and a long sword at the other, in scabbards striped black and gold. Drawing the dirk, he tested its edge with his thumb, pulled a whetstone from his belt pouch, and gave it a few licks. He prided himself on keeping his weapons sharp. "When I return, I expect a warm room and clean rushes," he warned the thralls as he drew on a pair of dark gloves, the silk decorated with a delicate scroll-work tracery in golden thread. Theon returned to the great keep through a covered stone walkway, the echoes of his footsteps mingling with the ceaseless rumble of the sea below. To get to the sea tower on its crooked pillar, he had to cross 3 further bridges, each narrower than the one before. The last was made of rope and wood, and the wet salt wind made it sway underfoot like a living thing. Theon's heart was in his mouth by the time he was halfway across. A long way below, the waves threw up tall plumes of spray as they crashed against the rock. As a boy, he'd used to run across this bridge, even in the black of night. "Boys believe nothing can hurt them," his doubt whispered. "Grown men know better." The door was grey wood studded with iron, and Theon found it barred from the inside. He hammered on it with a fist and cursed when a splinter snagged the fabric of his glove. The wood was damp and mouldy, the iron studs rusted. After a moment the door was opened from within by a guard in a black iron breastplate and pothelm. "You're the son?" "Out of my way, or you'll learn who I am." The man stood aside. Theon climbed the twisting steps to the solar. He found his father seated beside a brazier, beneath a robe of musty sealskins that covered him foot to chin. At the sound of the boots on stone, the Lord of the Iron Islands lifted his eyes to behold his last living son. He was smaller than Theon remembered, and so gaunt. Balon Greyjoy had always been thin, but now he looked as though the gods had put him in a cauldron and boiled every spare ounce of flesh from his bones, until nothing remained but hair and skin. Bone-thin and bone-hard he was, with a face that might have been chipped from flint. His eyes were flinty too, black and sharp, but the years and the salt winds had turned his hair the grey of a winter sea, flecked with whitecaps. Unbound, it hung past the small of the back. 9 years, is it? Lord Balon said at last. 10, Theon answered, pulling off his torn gloves. A boy they took. What are you now? A man, Theon answered. Your blood and your heir. Lord Balon grunted.
We shall see.
You shall, Theon promised.
10 years, you say? Stark had you as long as I, and now you come as his envoy.
Not his, Theon said. Lord Eddard is dead, beheaded by the Lannister Queen.
They're both dead, Stark and that Robert who broke my walls with his stones. I vowed I'd live to see them both in their graves, and I have.
He grimaced.
Yet the cold and the damp still makes my joints ache as when they were alive. So what does it serve?
It serves, Theon moved closer. I bring a letter.
Did Ned Stark dress you like that?
His father interrupted, squinting up from beneath his robe.
Was it his pleasure to dress you in velvets and silks and make you his own sweet daughter?
Theon felt the blood rising to his face. I am no man's daughter. If you mislike my garb, I will change it.
You will!
Throwing off the furs, Lord Balon pushed himself to his feet. He was not so tall as Theon remembered.
That bauble round your neck, was it bought with gold or iron?
Theon touched the gold chain. He had forgotten. It has been so long. In the old way, women might decorate themselves with ornaments bought with coin. But a warrior only wore the jewelry he took off the corpses of enemies slain by his own hand. Paying the iron price, it was called.
You blush red as a maid, Theon. A question was asked. Is it the gold price you paid, or the iron?
The gold, Theon admitted. His father slid his fingers under the necklace and gave it a yank so hard it was like to take Theon's head off, had the chain not snapped first.
My daughter has taken an axe for a lover,
Lord Balon said.
I will not have my son bedeck himself like a whore.
He dropped the broken chain into the brazier, where it slid down amongst the coals.
It is as I feared. The Greenlands have made you soft, and the Starks have made you theirs.
You're wrong. Ned Stark was my gaoler, but my blood is still salt and iron. Lord Balon turned away to warm his bony hands over the brazier.
Yet the Stark pup sends you to me like a well-trained raven, clutching his little message.
There is nothing small about the letter I bear, Theon said, and the offer he makes is one I suggested to him.
This Wolf King heeds your counsel, does he?
The notion seemed to amuse Lord Balon. He heeds me, yes. I've hunted with him, trained with him, shared meat and mead with him, warred at his side. I have earned his trust. He looks on me as an older brother.
No!
His father jabbed a finger at his face.
Not here, not in Pike, not in my hearing. You will not name him brother, the son of the man who put your true brothers to the sword. Or have you forgotten Roderick and Meryn, who are your own blood?
I forget nothing. Ned Stark had killed neither of his brothers in truth. Roderick had been slain by Lord Jason Mallister at Seaguard, Meryn crushed in the collapse of the Old South Tower. But Stark would have done for them just as quick had the tide of battle chanced it to sweep them together. I remember my brothers very well, Theon insisted. Chiefly he remembered Roderick's drunken cuffs and Meryn's cruel japes and endless lies. I remember when my father was a king, too. He took out Robb's letter and thrust it forward. Here, read it, Your Grace. Lord Balon broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His black eyes flicked back and forth.
So the boy would give me a crown again, he said, and all I need do is destroy his enemies.
His thin lips twisted in a smile. By now Robb is at the Golden Tooth, Theon said. Once it falls, he'll be through the hills in a day. Lord Tywin's host is at Harrenhal, cut off from the west. The Kingslayer is a captive at Riverrun. Only Sir Stafford Lannister and the raw green levies he's been gathering remain to oppose Robb in the west.
Sir Stafford will put himself between Robb's army and Lannisport, which means the city will be undefended when we descend upon it by sea. If the gods are with us, even Casterly Rock itself may fall before the Lannisters so much as realize that we are upon them." Lord Balon grunted. "Casterly Rock has never fallen." "Until now," Theon smiled. And how sweet that would be. His father did not return the smile. "So this is why Robb Stark sent you to me after so long? So you would win my consent to this plan of his?" "It is my plan, not Robb's," Theon said proudly. "Mine, as the victory will be mine, and in time the crown. I will lead the attack myself if it please you. As my reward, I would ask that you grant me Casterly Rock for my own seat once we have taken it from the Lannisters." With the Rock, he could hold Lannisport and the Golden Lands of the West. It would mean wealth and power such as House Greyjoy had never seen. "You reward yourself handsomely for a notion and a few lines of scribbling." His father read the letter again. "The pup says nothing about a reward, only that you speak for him and I am to listen, and give him my sails and swords, and in return he will give me a crown." His flinty eyes shifted to meet his son's. "He will give me a crown," he repeated, his voice going sharp. "He will give me a crown," he repeated, his voice growing sharp. "A poor choice of words. What is meant is—" "What is meant is what is said. The boy will give me a crown, and what is given can be taken away." Lord Balon tossed the letter into the brazier atop the necklace. The parchment curled, blackened, and took flame. Theon was aghast. "Have you gone mad?" His father laid a stinging backhand across his cheek. "Mind your tongue! You're not in Winterfell now, and I am not Robb the Boy, that you should speak to me so. I am the Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, King of Salton Rock, son of the Sea Wind, and no man gives me a crown. I pay the iron price. I will take my crown, as Euron Redhand did 5,000 years ago." Theon edged backward away from the sudden fury in his father's tone. "Take it then!" he spat, his cheek still tingling. "Call yourself King of the Iron Islands. No one will care, until the wars are over and the victor looks about and spies the old fool perched off his shore with an iron crown on his head." Lord Balon laughed. "Well, at least you are no craven. No more than I am a fool. Do you think I gather my ships to watch them rock at anchor? I mean to carve out a kingdom with fire and sword, but not from the west, and not at the bidding of King Robb the Boy. Casterly Rock is too strong, and Lord Tywin too cunning by half. Aye, we may take Lannisport, but we would never keep it. No, I hunger for a different plum. Not so juicy sweet, to be sure, yet it hangs there ripe and undefended." Where? Theon might have asked, but by then he already knew. Who are we talking about?
Theon.
Theon. Okay. See, it's not just the Starks that forget he's there.
Holy cringe, Batman.
Oh god. I read this so long ago. And then I read it again, and I had completely forgotten how gross Theon is as a person.
Right? He's a F-boy.
I'm pretty sure
Sure.
when we discussed the Davos chapter, we were just like, "Oh yeah, and let's explore Theon's mind and see what's going on inside that head." Oh god, do I wish
We never opened that can of worms.
No, why must we look inside his brain?
The man has daddy issues, for sure.
Big time.
"I'll make you proud, Daddy. I will."
Like, literally, the entire time, all he can talk about is, "I can't wait to see Pike and bring honor to my family." God, he's like Prince Zuko. But gross.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
He is like Prince Zuko. Oh my god. Spends all his time on the ship.
Yeah. Where's Uncle Iroh when you need him? Well, I guess his uncle isn't quite as nice as Iroh.
I'm trying to think which uncle is the most Iroh like, and honestly, it probably is Aaron.
Aaron.
I would not say Euron is very Iroh.
No, definitely not. We haven't met him yet, so we can't talk about him.
He's mentioned though. He does. Euron gets his first mention in the series.
Yes, he does.
Him and his ship, the Silence, are nowhere to be seen.
Aaron seems to have gone a little crazy.
He's very zealous.
I mean, there's definitely something going on with people drowning and coming back a little cuckoo.
I know. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Exactly. Might be something behind this whole drowned god thing.
I mean, we've definitely had evidence and discussion about the old gods being a thing. The drowned god could definitely be a thing. And let me just say, dear God, do I feel bad for the captain's daughter.
Feel bad for the captain? You kidding me? I mean, yeah, the captain's daughter is bad, but this is gross.
It's horrible.
Like, yeah, I'm taking your daughter down below deck. Okay.
Ew.
Yeah, it's gross.
Ew. And well, the worst part is she genuinely just seems like nice and sweet and innocent and naive and all the things, and Theon just ruins her.
Yeah.
Because this is a society in which you have to be a virgin before you get married. And I think takes advantage of the fact that she's just not the smartest.
Well, yeah. Maybe Catelyn was right about Theon. Maybe he's...
Catelyn does not like him.
No.
It's for a good reason, you know?
Yeah.
You could say, Catelyn didn't like Jon either, but you know what? She seems to be kind of on the money on this one. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Theon just does not seem like the smartest person. And he, I don't know. I feel like he's just so blinded with the whole daddy issue thing. He wants to please his father. Like, the whole time he's talking about Eddard Stark and his father, he's talking about how he was never really his son and yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
But as he's talking about it in like a negative way, and he's talking about his father in a positive way, Ned Stark still seems positive and his father seems negative.
Yeah, but he's not.
The best that his father has to offer is worse than the worst Ned Stark has to offer.
Right.
Ned really... I mean, if you're gonna be a I guess,
hostage.
Ward, yeah. I was thinking of the right word. Yeah, technically a hostage. It's probably not the worst place to be a hostage in Winterfell under Eddard Stark.
How do you think it must be to be a hostage at Casterly Rock?
I mean...
Actually, probably not too bad.
I was going to say...
Probably not too bad.
I'd probably just read and get drunk with Tyrion all the time.
And I think for the most part, Papa Lannister would ignore you as long as, like, nothing bad happened to you and he lost his leverage.
Yeah.
So I think, actually, Casterly Rock could be kind of nice.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you'd be all right. You know where I really wouldn't want to be a ward at? Fucking Greyjoy's place. My God, that place, the Iron Island, it just sound...
Yeah,
awful.
I would not want to be hostage-ified there.
Good. There's nothing good. All they're talking about how cold and damp the castle is.
But Theon, like, romanticizes the crap out of it about how we're Ironborn and we're this and we're strong and we rape and plunder and pillage and we're pirates and we're proud and blah, 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 blah. And then you get there and it's like, the Iron Islands literally sucks.
Yeah.
It sounds terrible.
We can't grow food because we don't have...
The ground is just rocks. It rains all the time.
We don't have any gold. All we have is iron. The freaking castle. The castle.
It's
The
falling apart.
Greyjoy. Yeah.
Because of all the ocean spray and stuff.
Like, all they talk about is the castle is so cold and damp and...
Yeah, wasn't his mattress, like, mildewed?
Yeah, the tapestries were all mildewed and there was... Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah. But yeah, no, Winterfell sucked.
Yeah.
Heated walls and hot springs, and yeah, Winterfell really sucked.
Theon's father has got to be the most toxic man alive. He's literally just like, you're not a man unless you suffer all the time.
Yeah.
You could be cold and damp and you shouldn't buy anything.
You have to pay the iron price. I actually kind of liked that whole idea of did you pay the iron price or the gold price?
Yeah.
Like that's cool, and how they explain what that means.
Yeah, that is kind of cool.
And then the Greyjoy words, we do not sow.
Yeah.
What is dead may never die, but only rises
again.
Again, all of those little phrases are very cool and important, as they'll come back later.
Yep.
Foreshadowing, anyone?
Speaking of things that'll come back later, we did learn a little bit about Asha.
Theon has a sister.
Yes, who has married an ex. Which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like, was that figuratively, or was this, what is it called when someone falls in love with inanimate objects?
Something philia, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was Chris Angel, like, married a mannequin or something like that. Something weird.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was just publicity for his show, and he, because he tried to be like the weird dude, but
a human wife.
Yeah, I think so. But
not that I keep up on the comings and goings of Chris Angel.
I don't know what's been going on with him. I remember he had a show, and I watched like a season of it, and it was pretty cool, but he was kind of weird.
I never watched it. I was just never interested. But anyway, let's talk about Theon.
Yes, Theon. I think Theon probably would do something weird like that. But Asha...
I think he would do something weird like that if his daddy told him it would make him proud of him.
Yeah, that's probably...
Oh my god, do Theon and Tyrion have the same problem?
I think so. Except Tyrion's smarter.
And a lot more like his father.
Yeah. Theon just needs to accept that he's not this hard, iron-born...
I think it's just so funny how he dresses. Martin takes the trouble to write in the descriptions of Theon's clothes and all the stuff he puts on, and then he walks in and Balon's just like, you are dressed like a girl, and just fancy, frilly everything, and just totally rips it apart, and just takes a giant dump all over him. Like, yeah. Hello, son. I haven't seen you in how many
10
years?
years.
It's been 10 years since I've seen you. Here, let me insult you in every way possible. As a welcome home.
What's a man supposed to do? Hug his son? No. Tell him he loves him? No.
Well, if Papa Lannister is any example, hell no. That's not what daddies do in this story.
I feel like Papa Lannister is less of a toxic man than...
I am actually gonna go ahead and say that. I think Papa Lannister is, if anyone could be less toxic, or more toxic, it is Balon Greyjoy.
Yeah.
He makes Papa Lannister look like Father of the Year, actually.
At least
Papa Lannister can give a compliment.
He can. Or if he doesn't have any compliments to give, he does sometimes just not say anything.
Yeah. Maybe Papa Lannister understands if you don't have anything nice to say sometimes. Maybe just don't say anything at all.
I mean, that doesn't stop him from saying things sometimes.
No, I think he very much chooses the time and place to abide by that rule.
Well, yeah.
I.e., anytime Tyrion is not in the room.
Yeah.
But Balon Greyjoy just seems to have no filter of any kind.
Or he just doesn't care.
Or he doesn't.
Alright, so all that weird stuff aside, the real plot that happened in this is we found out that Theon is going to betray Robb Stark. After everything.
So,
He's gonna betray Robb Stark.
He comes to his daddy with the note from Robb, gives him the note. And Balon Greyjoy is like, I am not going to be given a crown. I'm gonna take it. That's what you do. That's what you do in the Iron Islands. You don't get stuff. You don't make deals. You go and you take it. And Theon's like, all of a sudden, after 10 years of presumably a very nice life at Winterfell, I'm thinking.
That's why the whole time he talks about Winterfell and the Starks, he's like positive. Like,
But
I fought alongside Robb Stark. He's always been like a brother. Don't you use that word around here about him. He's not your brother.
And then by the end of it, he's like, yeah, go Iron Islands. Screw the Starks. I hate those guys. They were terrible to me. Making sure I was clothed and had food and learned how to fight and had a bed at night and had friends. They stink. Those wolf softy stinkers. I'd rather hang out with squids any day.
It was I don't know. Theon is
just rotten. It's just so rotten that you see it literally within 2 days, or however many days he's back at Pike. He's just like, yeah, F Robb Stark.
Not even 2 days. It was literally in the time that he was speaking to his father, because he was trying to convince his father
that's true.
That it was a good deal and that he helped with it and all this.
And then his father says that there's a place that's literally ripe for the taking. And Theon's like, oh.
This will make my daddy love me.
I'm going to help him, and then my daddy will love me again. And I will be made heir to the Iron Islands because you want to be the heir to that?
Yeah, like...
Ooh. Dragonstone sounds better.
I was about to say, I didn't think any place could sound more appealing or less appealing than Dragonstone, but here we are.
Here we are. Here we find ourselves.
At least Dragonstone, you have Stannis, who...
Having a place that has Stannis is always a place that is better than a place that does not have Stannis in it.
I guess it's better to have someone who has no emotions than someone who has a lot of negative emotions. Toxic emotions.
Yes, I'd much rather have a man who can bottle up all of his emotions and keep them inside and just not react at all than someone who literally vomits negativity and toxicity with every sentence.
If only they could have gotten Ben Stein to play Stannis. Would have been great.
Davos.
Has anyone seen Davos?
I wish to talk to Davos. Not now, Melisandre. I'm busy.
We must get my crown, Davos.
We must attack King's Landing. No, I don't want to talk to my spoiled brother Renly right now.
They'll never do it because the show has been ruined, but it would be great if Saturday Night Live did do a skit with Stannis.
Ben Stein as Stannis. That'd be great.
Is he still alive?
Ben Stein?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just ancient, but he's still alive.
That's pretty much it.
Not only is Theon Greyjoy a backstabber, but he is also like extremely misogynistic.
Yeah, 100%.
Like it's cringy as
this was a lot of toxic masculinity in this chapter.
It was very uncomfortable, the amount of toxic masculinity that was in the room.
Yeah.
Because dear God, it just like I felt like I needed to take a shower after reading this.
It's pretty bad.
And then I go back and I think, yeah, guys, I don't know why you hate Tywin so much. It seems great compared to Balon Greyjoy. I'd rather hang out with Papa Lannister any day than sit at Pike in the cold and the damp and the castle literally falling into the ocean every couple of years. At least Casterly Rock is nice and they have a sewage system.
I was gonna say, and you could be comfortable
And they have a modern,
hey,
have a modern like drainage system.
Yeah.
So there's also a plus.
Like, you're gonna be sitting there talking to Balon, just like shivering and damp and cold. Like, we light a fire? Why? You need to be warned like some woman?
Right! That's exactly
Like-
what would happen.
Well, yeah.
That's exactly how that would go down. Not in Winterfell, though. Not at Casterly Rock. Not even at Dragonstone or Storm's End.
No.
Of course, in Dorne, you'd be like, dude, it's so hot. I just want to take a bath.
Right.
I'm going to go swim in the pools. Dorne is actually probably a pretty great place to be a hostage.
Dorne would probably be a nice place to be a hostage.
It's nice and sunny and warm and tropical and everything else.
Yeah.
Also, the other thing about this chapter, I don't say it very often, and I think you're not going to say it either, but this chapter proves that, I'm going to say it, Catelyn was right about something.
Yeah. She was right not to trust Theon.
She told Rob.
Mm-hmm.
She told him. And he didn't listen to his mama.
I mean, if she hadn't been wrong so many other times.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, a broken clock is still right twice a day.
Yeah, that's true. The Tyrion thing was a pretty terrible mess up.
Yeah. Gotta control your emotions.
That was pretty terrible. For everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't she say that in her last chapter? She was just like, shouldn't have done that. Should not have done that.
Yeah, I think she was.
Yeah, I thought so. So after this disgusting display of masculinity in its worst possible form,
we're going to go visit a strong, independent woman who wanted a man but doesn't have a man, so needs to make do.
but she doesn't have a man, but she's got dragons.
And one of them's a man. Are they all boys?
They're all boys.
They are? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
find
that's
out, and
right.
we find out what their names are in
Yeah,
the
we
next
do.
chapter.
They get names.
They get names.
So yeah, we go to see Dany. If you couldn't guess from the dragon reference.
Woman don't need no man if she got dragons.